and welcome to this video. Today I'm going to try and make some custom keycaps. Now the first step in this will be to make the mold. So I got some base keycaps which have no lettering on them because the letters are mostly raised, and I really don't want to have to either sand other keycaps or, you know, have to use them for the specific letters they have on it. So I decided Blanco is the way to go, and they were actually quite cheap on Amazon, so that's also great. Now I'm actually gonna plug up the bottom with clay first because I don't want any of the silicone to go in there, and the easiest way is just to use some oven baked clay that I can then use later for sculpting again. And this is basically just to make sure that the underside will be as flat as possible for when I pour the first layer, because the first layer of this will be the outside layer, and then I'm gonna make like an insert which will then give like the little plus sign prong things that hold the keys in place. Now to actually make the mold boxes, I used my 3D printer and printed out two parts, this large part and then a smaller part, which I can then, once the first side has cured, put on the other side when I pour the inside of the caps. But for now I'm gonna use these big parts and I'm gonna surround them with tape, which is, I found, always the easiest way to make really sturdy mold boxes without having any issues. And the good thing is, with the tape on the bottom, you can just stick whatever item you actually wanna encase in silicone, or, you know, get a negative off in silicone, and it will hold really well in there. And I never actually had any issues with the stuff coming loose from the tape. So this is actually my preferred method. And all I'm doing then is centering the keycaps in the corresponding boxes. I try to reserve as much silicone as I can, so I try to make the boxes fit the keycaps well. Now one thing I of course forgot was I was actually picking out the keycaps from the set, but yeah, I actually during the time I was pouring the first layer and chose them, and the time that I actually finished making the molds, I had to change my keyboard because my keyboard broke, sadly, and we beyond repair at that. So yeah, basically half of the molds I'm making I cannot actually use for my own keyboard, but that's totally fine because I'm sure one day I will have a keyboard again where I can use them. Now the silicone I poured is like a medium type hardness, so it is sturdy enough to actually hold up. It's a Shure 33, if I remember correctly, and this one actually cures quite quickly. So all I did was put it in my vacuum chamber to get the air bubbles out, and then slowly pour it over top and then let it cure, and it cured quite quickly. So all I did was chamfer the edges a little bit so that when I make the caps they will sit perfectly in there. I have no video footage of that because I did that randomly when I had some time in between having to do work. And then all I did was put some just random, separating thing in there. In this case I'm using petroleum jelly, which works great, but if you have silicone separating spray for these kinds of things, that's even better. I just didn't want it to get into the keycaps themselves because I want the exact replica, so I didn't want to risk using the silicone spray. And then I poured the next layer of silicone, and as you can see, they are separating actually really easily. Now this one, to get the little tiny holes that you need for actually putting the keys on the keyboard, actually I vacuumed the mold right after I poured silicone so that the air bubbles from the inside could escape, and that worked really, really well, as you can see. Now the molds don't really leave any space for customization, so I decided to chop off the top, which in the end I realized is absolutely not the right thing you should do. And that's because you really need the long middle part and the space on the sides of it for it to properly hold. Now I remedied that by actually using a Dremel and just Dremeled the sides, which I also didn't film because it was a long, awkward process, and all I did was use a Dremel and spend like 2 hours dremeling all around the things, but in the end it worked out. And anyways, before I can do that, obviously I need to pour this. So the base layer, I mixed some glitter in with some clear resin. And then I mixed in a lot of mica powders in this like purple, blue, and this pinkish color. And I'm gonna try to make the galaxy effect with that. So I'm gonna just slowly add them with the stylus. And then I'm also gonna add some of these tiny nail decals in there. I don't really pay attention to the orientation. I really should have done that, but that's totally fine. It worked out in the end. So I'm just putting in some tiny moons, tiny stars, and some of the like gold sphere things. And I do that for basically all of them, and then I let this layer harden as well. And the last remaining thing after that is just pouring the outer layer, which will make the entire shell of the keycap and the inside with the like tiny holders. And for that I'm actually using this syringe, and I'm like squirting the resin directly into the surrounding area of the holder, so that there's no air gaps and no issues when I actually want to use these. And that actually worked out really well the first time, so glad that I did it. And then I just casually like poured the resin in there, overfilled it a bit, made sure that the caps will have enough resin. The only thing I would have loved, if I didn't forget it, was to make air holes on the side, so I can just squeeze out the resin from the side of the silicone mold, or like make a like tiny gap on the edge on the top, so that there will not be any large air bubbles. But yeah, I forgot that, and I only remembered while I was pouring this. Yeah, that may have caused some problems, but it was fine in the end. I could actually fix it with some UV resin, which I'm also not showing on camera because I didn't film it. I totally forgot to film it. I just was listening to some audiobooks and I didn't realize I didn't even turn on my camera. It was like so natural, I thought I did, but that's fine. It's like I kept the keycaps on the mold, used some UV resin on the side to like make a like very like flat area there that doesn't completely replicate the side, but it worked out really well in the end. So I'm sorry that I didn't film that. But yeah, as you can see, there's a lot of excess resin there, but that's totally fine. I totally expected that. I'm better more than less. And as you can see, the tops of the keycaps turned out absolutely amazing. You can see, especially on this one, that some of the edges aren't fully filled. I'm not really showing that in this part, sadly, but yeah, so some of the edges are kind of missing, but else these, like from the surface and the looks, they absolutely turned out beautiful, and I think I achieved the galaxy effect. Now, of course, the only thing was the dremeling of the bottoms, which sadly I on some parts, because the Dremel isn't as exact, I messed up the sides a little bit, so after actually 2 months of use they came loose, but as you can see, the first time I actually put them onto the keyboard, they fit perfectly. They're really easy to put on there. Of course, I had to find the ones that actually fit, so as you can see, I had to puzzle a little bit, but yeah. As I said, I made more than I need, and these were the ones I made. Sadly, this keyboard has a smaller shift key, so the other one I had before had the other key that I just placed, that the tab key was basically the length of the shift key, and then the tab was a bit longer. Luckily, the keys still fit in this one, but yeah. I had to actually check this key because it got stuck, but for some reason it wasn't actually my keycap, it was just the key getting stuck for a couple seconds. After like using it for like a day or so, it completely vanished and the key didn't get stuck anymore. And with that, the first like set of keycaps I made are actually finished. Actually, lining them up was a little bit harder because as they had more mass, they tended to slip off more, but as you can see, they stick really well. Now, here are some of the extras I had. They're also really beautiful, and I hope that one day I can use them. You can kind of see the clear edge that I put on one of them. Like, I could totally paint that, but since you cannot really see the edges of the keycaps, it's totally fine. But yeah, I think it's like this perfectly nebula galaxy effect. I absolutely love them. But as I said before, these are just the first ones. I actually wanted to try and improve my molds. So these keycaps actually have like these tiny plastic bridges in the middle, so I decided that should be the perfect height to still fill in without like taking away too much space for the holders. So I did mix up a very liquid like kind of plaster and just put that in to make sure it's flat and to like get out all of the air bubbles and fill in all the edges. It's really hard to see on the white keycaps. My camera really struggled with that, but you can kind of see it on the black ones. And this one was basically really easy. The plaster hardened very quickly, and the good thing about the plaster is you can just take it out of the keycaps, of the original keycaps, and there will be no lasting like thing stuck inside. I first thought of using resin, but that would have permanently bonded to the plastic, so plaster is the perfect solution. And then I just used the same base, but again with tape. Now this tape was a little bit softer, I couldn't find my other tape. I later found out I accidentally left it in my storage space, so yeah. Well, this one worked out well though. It's this kind of silver tape that you use for piping to like cover up like overlaps and stuff. And yeah. It did make it a little bit more wonky, but it definitely worked. Now this one I actually made a little bit thinner on the top to make it easier to get the even squeeze out of the resin. And before I actually used them, I cut off the edge on one of the like corners to make sure that I could actually squeeze out the air bubbles. But yeah, the second pour of the lid actually worked really well because I had way more space in there. Now that does mean these will not be ever keycaps that I can put in like 3D things that much. Like yeah, you can actually like put in like flat scenes, but not too 3D deep things because they will interfere with the pegs. But I think that's totally fine. I'm sure that I can at some point make some really nice and flat scenes. And as you can see, like the keycaps came out, and like some of the stuff came off some of the plaster, but that's totally fine. It's just a minor thing, and you can like actually peel it out of the silicone in the end, or just wash it off because it's kind of water soluble. Now for these ones, since they are flatter, I didn't want to actually start out with a clear coat. I wanted to try to immediately pour the galaxy. So I used this like teal color, this purple, and some black that I actually mixed in there to make the like galaxy effect. These will look a bit flatter, the others had like a little bit of the depth because of the clear part. But yeah, I really didn't want to risk it. I'm sure there's a way to actually make this work. But since this is basically a thin layer that I can only use, yeah, I was kind of limited to this. But it worked out well in the end. And again, I added some of the moons and stuff from the nail decor kit and just mixed up the black a little, and I think it turned out really nicely. And after this cured, I'm gonna spare you with the details on how I made the black part, because that's literally the same thing as I did with the prior one. So yeah, no need to repeat that, but yeah, here you can see the outcome in the end. Still missing some corners that could only be remedied at this point with a pressure pot. It's really hard to not get any air bubbles in these because they're closed off molds. But to fix that, and to actually, because some of them were actually in the pack sadly, I used some clay. So I just used some normal Sculpey, medium Sculpey, so that it's a bit softer and easier to shape, and I put it liberally around the sides, and I used a toothpick to shape it for the pegs, and then I hardened it, and it worked exceptionally well. I was really surprised on how well it worked. This was my effort to basically save it. At this point, by the way, this is my third pour because the second one didn't turn out at all, sadly. but it was basically the same. But as you can see, like all the gaps on the sides I filled up with clay, and then where it was still a little bit soft, I shaved it off. And then once I painted it black, you couldn't really tell the difference between the resin and the clay, because I actually like the texture of the keycaps. I didn't want to sand it down. Like I noticed that on the first one too. It's just easier to game with this like rough texture. But yeah, all I did was add the clay and then add some super glue to make sure that the clay is soaked through with that, because the clay is porous, and it worked out super well. And as you can see, they turned out amazing. They have also a really nice skeleton effect, and they actually sit a bit more flush than the others. So that will hopefully mean they will hold up a little bit longer. Now I'm gonna actually use the same method as I used for them for the other one with the clay, and I'm gonna like fix the text that I made a bit too thin while I was dremeling. So I will be able to absolutely use them. But for now I'm actually really happy with these ones, and they actually fit quite well to the dark keys I have. As you can see, I have like rainbow keys in the middle and the dark keys on the edges, and I think the others were a bit too bright for this keyboard, but I'm definitely gonna use them again, and I might mix and match them. Now making these was actually not that easy. Like the making the forms, the molds was actually quite simple, but in comparison to pouring them, just goes to show that you really need a pressure pot for these kinds of closed molds, or else they will not turn out well. But I'm glad I managed to fix them, and you cannot really tell on the sides. Actually, most of them have some fixed edges that are actually shown in the pictures, but you cannot tell at all. All I did was use some matte black paint on the edges, and it blended in practically perfectly. You can kind of see like the edges on the like lower key a little bit, but yeah, it turned out perfectly well. I'm super happy. But yeah, this project, like, you can buy keycap molds. They're actually quite expensive though, and I found the amount of silicone I used is definitely, even for the second pass, is actually costing less than getting a full set of the like ready-made ones, or even just sometimes some of the sets, which yeah, it's kind of sad to see, because I think making keycaps is really fun, and it's like one of the most customizable thing ever. So I hope they will become more accessible at some point, and I hope that maybe brands like Sophie and Toffee or something like that make keycaps, and not the ones with the Steven Universe toppers. I mean like pure plain keycaps. But yeah, as I said, super happy with this project. This actually took like 3 months to make, so I'm sorry that I had to kind of rush through this video. But at the point of finishing this, I had like over 5 hours of footage with this, by far the longest I ever had for a craft project that I had to edit. So yeah, I had to kind of cut it down to make it like workable sizes, although in this video it looks like I've sped through all this process, which actually the curing of the silicone and stuff, that only took like half a day each, so I made the molds really quickly. Just the times the resin needed to cure, the times I actually spent on like pouring the resin into the keycaps, because although I sped up, I actually spent like half an hour at least working on each set of the keycaps for the base galaxy layer. So yeah, I spared you guys of that footage, but I hope you enjoyed watching this nonetheless. And I hope this inspired you to maybe try and make your own keycaps, even if you have to buy expensive molds, or hopefully if you can, make your own. And I will see you next time. Have a great day. Bye!